specifically. So let's reviewing your class grade average. It appears your A7 English 10 class is performing at a proficiency level of 92.2%.
Yeah.
We're looking at performance for the first 2 months of the second semester. And so I was curious, what actions did you take to kind of reach this goal?
Part of it is that they've really, that class has really been narrowed down to the students that are really, really focused on getting into the work, really heavy inquiry in that class. Anything that we're talking about, students have multiple questions, and then they use the habits of discussion to build off. So I think that that's been a really nice piece that we introduced last year in teaching them, how do you take a question and build onto it with more questions or more inquiry, more thoughts to dig deeper into that analysis and synthesis piece. We also have a really strong camaraderie in the class. Kids aren't afraid to make mistakes. They're not afraid to be wrong. So that allows them for a lot more openness in terms of asking questions and kind of taking risks. They're comfortable taking risks, and those risks pay off because in their academics then they take chances and they push themselves out of that comfort zone to try something new, and then that allows them to grow and reach, further levels of proficiency for sure.
Excellent. The second semester calm down.
Yeah.
Okay, so today I want to dive directly into standard, I think it's reading language 910-3. And so you can look at it here. Analyze how complex characters, for example, those with multiple conflicting motivations, develop over the course of a text, interact with other characters, and advance plot or develop the theme. And so I was just curious, kind of in your own words, just looking at this, what do you think students need to know kind of that will lead to mastery of the standard?
First, they need to understand how to analyze. And I teach them the basics of that with the why, how, and so what. So instead of telling me what happened in the story, ask me why it happened, ask me how it happened, and so what does this either imply for future events, or what does this teach us about the character's intentions, or so what could we, use to foreshadow, all sorts of things. They also need to understand the plot of the story. So, with all of this focus on analysis and synthesis and higher order thinking skills, they still need to know the basics of what happened. They still need to understand, first this happened, second this happened, third this happened. So the general plot structure. And then they need to be engaged with the story, engaged enough to notice nuances and subtleties that are going to lead them to make these conclusions about the characters and their motivations.
Okay. And in this activity, I see the objective was, if I'm not mistaken here, students will be able to evaluate Oedipus as a king, synthesizing their evidence with at least one prior reading source in 100 words or less with 85% proficiency.
Yeah.
Let's say. Okay, now in looking at that, I want to kind of take 1 to 2 minutes to look at this exemplar and identify where the highest leverage gaps might be lie in preparation for a reteach activity. And this is kind of that exemplar we discussed earlier.
Yeah. So in this exemplar, the highest leverage would be understanding the difference between retelling the story and analyzing the story.
Retelling versus analyzing.
A lot of students want to tell kind of what happened and why it happened, which is a retelling of the story, rather than going into kind of deeper into those conflicting motivations and really the drama. I want to know about why the drama is occurring.
Interesting. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now I want to take a look at, we had a student exemplar.
Yeah.
And so if you could take a look at that, and I have a copy here. If we could take 1 minute, how does the student exemplar compare to the teacher exemplar we just reviewed? Thank you. And I'm just curious if you see any gaps.
Yeah.
So take a minute, just review it.
Yeah.
When you're ready, we can go ahead and just identify what you see when we're comparing the teacher exemplar versus the exemplar you're reading now. I thought it was pretty good myself.
Yeah. So here she starts off with some background info, and we've discussed that there's a difference between background information and summary. And the background information allows the student to say, okay, these are the things that you need to know, reader. I try to teach my students, assume that your reader has read the text to, again, push them more towards that higher order thinking. But what she does is she frames, and we've been discussing this, she frames the background information answering the question about him being king. So rather than just give me all this information about the story, she's specifically giving me background information about him as king, which is perfect, which is exactly what I'm looking for at the beginning. And then she moves into her evaluation. And her evaluation brings in some other characters, a little comparing and a little contrasting. And then finally she attaches it to two of our prior readings, one from this year and one from last year, saying that, Oedipus is doing his job. He's flawed, but he's doing what he needs to do as a king by protecting his people from this plague. She synthesizes with Machiavelli's The Prince, and the idea that you need to look the part but not necessarily always act the part, meaning outwardly you have to do certain things to maintain control, but inwardly you can have your own beliefs that may not totally mesh with everything that you're saying and doing publicly. And we know that not so much. Now, this was very early on in the story of Oedipus. I think later on she might attach that connection more to Jocasta rather than Oedipus, but at the beginning of the story I totally see why she made that connection. She backs it up with supporting details, so to me it's legit, because I'm just wanting to get them started on this evaluation process. And we're going to evaluate him kind of a couple more times as we get through the book. And then she also goes above and beyond to connect his ignorance to Santiago's beginning ignorance in The Alchemist, where he's kind of starting off on something new and doesn't quite know all that it entails. And that's kind of what he does with this promise to his people to solve the problem of the plague for them. He does not quite know the Pandora's box that he's opening.
That makes a lot of sense. So would you say there's a gap between that teacher exemplar and what Kaya was able to produce?
Yeah, the gap is, there is a bit of a gap in the fact that the teacher exemplar was very simplified. It was just, this is what is expected, versus going above and beyond and making it your own. And that's really what I want my students to be able to do. I want them to see the bones of the project. I want them to see the basic stuff, but I always tell them, if you just stick with the basic stuff, that's probably about a C.
Okay.
So how are you going to bring it up from there? And she did that with her background information. She did that with her synthesis of multiple texts, and really using supporting details from Oedipus to connect to that synthesis and supporting details from the prior texts.
That makes perfect sense. And so I think now that we kind of see our exemplar of what we expect in relation to that summary based on the objective, and now looking at the student exemplar, who actually she scored pretty high.
Yeah.
I want to take a look at a few other student examples. That's
Okay.
kind of this would be our middle.
I think this was
She performed in the middle
one.
round, and then this is one of our lower performing students.
Okay.
And so what I want to do is take 2 minutes to see what are the key gaps between the rest of our student work and the student exemplar as well as the teacher exemplar. And then looking back at our chart, using the language of the standard and the exemplar, I want to know what are the key misconceptions for our scholars.
Okay.
So go ahead and take a couple minutes and just kind of review. So what are the key misconceptions for our scholars?
The key misconceptions is that you can tell the story rather than answer the question. Another key misconception.
Tell me more about that. Tell the story rather than answer the question. So
Yeah.
you're seeing them retelling the story in their work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Retelling the story of Oedipus and retelling basically the story of how he promised to save his people from the plague. We were only a couple pages into the text when this assignment was given.
Okay.
So just giving me an overview of what we read, an overview of what they took notes on. In our middle exemplar, she is making some claims. She's calling him courageous, and she does connect it to the prince, but she doesn't go beyond that. She says in here that it could be like the prince, but the difference is that there is a plague. Eventually, Oedipus would suffer or die. And then there would be no kingdom, which is a quote that she's pulling from the priest when he says, basically, hey, you got to solve this plague, because if you don't, everyone's going to be dead, and what's a king with a dead kingdom?
Okay.
So she's using text evidence. She's basically hitting all the things that she has to do. She's using text evidence. She's evaluating him. Well, she's naming her idea of him being a courageous king. She names it, but she doesn't evaluate it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
She says he's courageous. She says it's similar to the prince in that you have to stand up and be the leader of those people, but she doesn't push it further than that.
And back to your why, how, so what? She didn't kind of go with the why. Like,
no,
why is
she
that
didn't.
particular
She
point?
really didn't hit the why. She didn't hit the how, and she didn't hit the so what. She just went through the what, answering each of the questions with what.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So just moving, I want to summarize exactly kind of what we're seeing. Would you say the mid to low performing scholars did not make connections to prior texts in order to better evaluate the character's actions
Yes.
in the story?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we're gonna punch that. So our key reteach is for in analyzing scholars' proficiency at analyzing how complex characters develop over the course of the text by making connections to prior texts.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I want to go right into a reteach plan.
Okay.
So would you use, just based on kind of the evidence of student work, do you think we should use a guided discourse or modeling?
I think guided discourse.
Why?
But I think modeling could also work well too.
Okay.
I
went with guided discourse. Well, I think within this activity, the research, I believe we can do a guided discourse, really because we'll be able to synthesize their evidence with at least one prior reading source in 100 words or less, and we have a number of assignments who actually met the target of the exemplar. And so if you have if more than half the class hit the nail on the head, we can go and kind of use a guided discourse to allow student work to guide our reteach. So so using a guided discourse, students will be able to evaluate Oedipus. That throws
I
me
know
off. As a king, synthesizing their evidence with at least one prior reading source in 100 words or less with 85% proficiency. And so, what is the answer we want to see that will show we've closed the gap? What I'd like to do is, we're going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to kind of write a script in relation to what this reteach will look like. And then you'll write a script and I'll do the same, and then we can spar. I'm going to tell you right now, my script will hopefully be a little bit more simplified than yours, because I have some really quick hits that I know I want to see students do, and we have kind of a time frame that I want to make sure we don't overlap, and so then we'll compare. So I'm going to go ahead and write my script.
All right, I'm going to grab a pen and do that.
Sure, we're still recording. Well, yes. Okay. All right. You all done?
Yep.
All right. So let's compare. We can pull from each other to make the strongest point.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
And so. And just to kind of go to, and this is, I'm going to go into teacher mode.
Okay.
And so I'm addressing class. And today we're going to revisit our past assignment regarding Opus as a king. We're going to look at several student exemplars that meet the objective of making connections from prior readings in order to better evaluate and express significance of characters' actions in the story. And how we're going to do this is we're going to look at a student exemplar that met the expectations of this objective, and then I'm also going to pass back what you submitted. And I want you to do a quick write, and I want you to compare what missing elements do you see that you might not have included or you did include in order to better rewrite your summary, okay, or your analysis. And so after you do your quick write, we're going to share out. I'm going to be walking around and looking at some of your answers to see what you pulled out to see how you can better rewrite your story. We're going to share out as a class to see what elements of some of those prior readings really made those connections to allow us to get a better sense of Opus as the king in order to meet the objectives of this lesson or this assignment. And so once we pull out some of the strengths that you might have missed in your assignment, you're going to rewrite your story, and then we're going to see if you did any better. Okay.
Cool.
Now, that is my quick summary of what I would do with the scholars in order to let them see an exemplar, but then allow them to kind of do their own little analysis and before they rewrite their own to kind of include some of the things that they missed, because we do know they just went kind of into summary mode versus analysis mode. And that's something I might also revisit what analysis means versus summarizing, just so students know what we really need with the objective of this assignment. So what did you come up with?
So I'll go back and I'll go into teacher mode as well.
Absolutely.
Good morning, class. I'm handing back your assignments in which you evaluated the quality of Oedipus's kingship early on in the story. I asked you all to evaluate his quality as a king and synthesize that with one other text that we read prior to today. So I'm going to ask you to take out your highlighters and take out your pens, because before we look at an example of student work, I want you to annotate your own work. So first off, I want you to read over your text. They're going to read over that. I'm going to give them time to do that. And then highlight in your writing where you named his quality, whether you said he was good, bad, courageous. Highlight that now. Of course, give them wait time. And then take your pen next to that and write what. All right, moving on. Next, we're going to highlight our text evidence on concerning how he exemplifies that quality that you named. Thirdly, we're going to highlight where we connect that to a prior reading. So find where you used a story or a book we read before and highlight that area. And next to that, write synthesis. Next up, we're going to look for evidence from the prior text, or or your ideas on how it connects to evidence from the current text. And you'll write why there. And then lastly, you're going to highlight where you evaluated Oedipus as a king, explaining that quality, and then write so what next to that.
Excellent. Okay, well that sounds like you have a pretty solid
So the
plan.
idea is I want them to see their gaps too. I
Right.
want them to see, oh, I forgot to do this, I forgot to do that. I think, like you said, going over the analysis, going over the synthesis, that's going to be like super important.
And so I just, there's some, in practicing, there were some additional items I wanted to make sure. I would definitely prompt certain students in relation to, then that would be kind of through my aggressive monitoring to look and to see just who I'm going to prompt in order so I can stamp that understanding throughout the reteach.
And do you think it would be good to then use like maybe I don't know because maybe I make photocopies of a good example and give them, or maybe we just use a dot cam and I have them actually take what they highlighted and show it under the dot cam for everybody to see.
Right. I think either
before
or.
we rewrite.
I think either or. They're both vehicles, so they're seeing the same information. So I think the dot cam saves paper.
Yeah.
Personally. So okay. Just kind of my last question. I have a few more, but just kind of wrapping up our practice. Just how did our practice, and this is something that's new, this is sparring, and how did it kind of enhance or what we plan to reteach? How could this help you?
Oh, well, it makes me look at my students' papers beyond a grade and starting to really understand what I'm doing to affect their perception. For example, like whenever I give them kind of the expectations, whether that be in sample work that I've created, like last year when we were doing 5-paragraph essays, I wrote the essay with them. But again, my sample, like I always said, I'm just showing you the basics. I'm showing you what a C is. And maybe what I have to do is kind of push myself to create examples at higher levels too, to let them see that. I don't necessarily want them to own that sample of higher work. I want them to be able to see the basics so all my students can at least meet, right? Or at least see what it looks like to meet expectations. But if I start going above and beyond in my stylistic way, I am worried sometimes as a teacher that I'm going to kind of force my style on them or force my way of doing it, when really what I'm trying to do here especially is with the learn by doing, get them to create their own style. So I don't, it's like that balance of how much example of the right work can I give them without making them copy me, even unintentionally.
And I think that is the key, and time is of the essence. Yeah. But that teacher exemplar, just, it's something I think there's a gap in our preparation sometimes, is when we see what the objective is. We know in our mind what it's supposed to look like. We provide the lesson, provide the assignment, but then we don't actually do the work ourselves.
Yeah.
And it gives us a different perspective.
Yep.
Where I guess it kind of saves us from kind of come in and look at it on the back end. Okay, what would I have done again? So if I've already done this now, if I can create 48-hour days, I mean, this would probably be a lot easier. 2 teachers in the classroom. That's another story. But that's great feedback, and where it helps me say, okay, how do I get teachers time to really analyze their own exemplar in order to then better analyze the students' high quality work, right? Yeah. So.
Because I use student exemplars a lot, but me doing it myself, I think you do have a point there of like it gets you kind of into their mind and into like how, you know.
I think it gives you a better idea of what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
So cool. So great work, Ms. Camille. When do you plan to conduct this reteach?
Probably Wednesday.
Okay.
Because on Wednesday we're gonna go over some. Finishing up with Oedipus and getting into some, we're actually going to come back to this question.
So I look forward to receiving your reteach data.
Yep.
From about a week from today, and we'll meet again.
Yep.
And then what I want you to kind of be thinking also, just in additional scaffolding and support, are there any scholars that you still feel like might still be on a low level that might need some additional tutoring time in order to really master this particular standard?
Probably just this one student.
Okay.
And I'm gonna talk with her myself on Wednesday. We already talked today about meeting up and having a conversation. Just seeing like why she's not retaining certain things that I would like her to retain.
And she's really improved this year.
She has, and that's why I have some questions for her and want to kind of just have a conversation on how I can better serve her.
All right. Well, I know we looked at the chart, we're looking at the standard, and just kind of breaking down what students need to know, what they need to show. Is there anything that we're missing here? I just want to make sure, in relation to our show chart, what students will need to show. In relation.
I mean, no, contextually, this is a very new skill for them. So the idea of synthesis is something where they're getting a lot of practice with it this year. I expect by their junior year that they've mastered that at about a 90% level. But they're doing well.
So I also looked at the upcoming standard of RL 910.5 and to see kind of how this more affects, analyze how an author's choices concerning how a structure of a text, order events within it, and manipulate time create such effects as mystery, tension, or surprise. And now, so the students are going a little bit deeper and looking, okay, what is the author thinking here in relation to how, they are expressing themselves in relation to how the way they're connecting words and how that affects the characters from the author's perspective. I think that's kind of where we're moving next.
That level of abstract thought is really new to students because students tend to open a book and just go on the journey without thinking about how the journey was created. And we're going to be working on that definitely in the next couple of weeks.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Ms. Keneal. I think we've satisfied our time today, and then we'll talk in about a week. Right. And I look forward to that data.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Say bye to Nicole. Okay. Push. Okay. Oh, right here.